Right now, big changes in the Roswell Police Department amid an ongoing 11 Alive investigation. The latest, the police chief's abrupt resignation, that following the firing of 3 officers. Here's what we know tonight. The department is trying its best to deal with these issues, as now we are learning that the chief has decided to resign. Here's Brendan Keefe with the very latest.
The police chief in Roswell has resigned.
The chief's resignation comes amid our multiple investigations revealing otherwise hidden scandals inside the Roswell Police Department. New documents show command staff knew far more about these incidents than the chief previously admitted. And the 3 officers who were fired received only verbal counseling before we demanded internal records.
Come on, can you stand up for me?
A handcuffed suspect loses consciousness in the back of a Roswell police car.
Point around. Come on.
Officer Reuter fears his prisoner is dying. The officer administers a dose of Narcan to counteract a possible overdose.
You okay, buddy? Hey, talk to me, Juan. Juan, talk to me.
They're just across the Alpharetta line, and backup arrives from both police departments. But the closest Roswell officer never arrives. Officer Brad Hill was the closest unit, just 1.3 miles away from his comrade trying to save a suspect's life. But Officer Hill's cruiser didn't move, even after this call came into police dispatch.
Hey, Alfred, it's Roswell. I have an officer who's at Old Milton and South Main Street with a prisoner in the back of his car who's agonal breathing. He had to stop. Can you start a unit?
The officer had called for an ambulance, but multiple police units from both Alpharetta and Roswell raced to the scene. In fact, Hill told investigators he saw not 1, but 2 police cruisers from Roswell race by his location en route to help their fellow officer. Hill didn't move.
Load and go, let's go. Load and go.
Police backup turned out to be crucial. The ambulance took too long, and officers carried the lifeless suspect to a Roswell police SUV.
Keep an eye on him, right? Keep an eye on him.
Roswell's transporting to North Fulton with the prisoner in the back.
They got him to the hospital and saved his life.
He's been Narcan?
Afterward, Roswell officers wondered out loud, where was Hill?
He was the closest unit to Reuter, who was in need of help at that point. He possibly had somebody dying in the back of his car.
He failed to respond to the incident that several officers had noticed and were very angry about it. One of the worst things a police officer can do is not help out another police officer.
I was not willing to stick my neck out with already an IA going home that is never ending.
Officer Hill said he wasn't dispatched to the call outside his jurisdiction, but told commanders the real reason he didn't respond was that he was already under investigation for one of our other news stories.
He's not going to tell you the truth. He hasn't told you the truth since he met you.
Hill was on the scene where a 13-year-old special needs boy was kept cold to get him to tell the truth.
Oh, but he's 13, from what I can tell.
And he's 24.
Yeah.
Did you make any comments related to current internal affairs investigations and not wanting to get into any more trouble?
That's probably accurate, yes. I'm going to be found wrong with this. It's clear in the way that y'all asked the question. So, I mean, can we just get it over with?
A lieutenant only verbally counseled Hill, and later that same month, Chief Rusty Grant signed Hill's raise and promotion to Master Police Officer.
He'll get promoted to MPO, and I just found out about it, and it frustrated me because I knew about all this.
Just 2 days after we asked for Hill's GPS data under the Records Act, Chief Grant offered to let Hill resign. When he refused, the chief fired him. The Roswell and Alpharetta officers who did respond were given the life-saving medal for their heroic efforts, while Officer Hill was given a pink slip. 4 officers received only verbal counseling before our investigations. 3 have been fired, and the department's top sergeant was demoted only after we demanded videos of these incidents. The deputy chief suddenly retired, and Chief Grant resigned amid our investigations.
We have this dark cloud that it's a morale thing that We are working through, and that's what it is perception. So everyone thinks that this is a terrible place to work for, and everyone is leaving so quickly, and we just have people walking out the door, and that, how can you ever work at this place? I've been here for 10 years. I've worked under 4 different chiefs. This sucks. This does absolutely suck. I will absolutely wholeheartedly agree, but this isn't unsurvivable. It just takes time. It's any agency. We just happen to be getting our asses handed to us.
Hey, it's Ramona. Not doing any field sobriety.
In each of these incidents, a group of concerned officers blew the whistle because they wanted to restore integrity and accountability.
Because I've got heat in this car.
He's freezing him out.
To the department's command staff.
That incident's being investigated.
A source who currently wears the uniform tells us the rank and file are optimistic now that Police Chief Grant is gone and Internal Affairs Captain Helen Duncan has been elevated to acting chief.
So, Brandon, other media outlets have been reporting that the police chief is retiring, but we're saying he's resigning. Which is it?
It turns out both are correct. The official press release issued by the city, it says retiring, retiring, retiring. But the internal email we obtained that the chief sent to the staff, it says his intent was to resign in addition to saying he's retiring from law enforcement. The bottom line is Roswell's losing its police chief with barely a little more than 2 weeks' notice after 6 years on the force.
What happens now?
The chief and the deputy chief are both leaving just as that top to bottom review that's a result of our investigation is beginning. That outside vendor will continue its work, and they say they're going to issue a report sometime in the spring to City Council. In the meantime, the Fulton County District Attorney is continuing its criminal investigation into that case involving the 13-year-old boy who was intentionally kept cold. The supervisor of the year, he's back on the force, demoted from sergeant to patrol officer, but the criminal investigation is still open.
A lot has happened.
Chief Grant, when did you first learn about the intentional freezing of a 13-year-old boy? Silence. Chief Rusty Grant and the city of Roswell refused to hand over documents that would show the chief knew officers kept a 13-year-old boy cold to get him to tell the truth.
Yeah, he ain't gonna say anything if it's warm.
Oh.
So he can sit over there and be cold. Let him get a little chilly.
Is it cold in the car, you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's freezing in there. Well, he's got all the windows rolled down and the heat off.
You gotta hang tight right here, since you can't remember Mom's phone number. And if I can make contact with Mom, then we'll get some heat going, all right?
You handed Sergeant Elsie Supervisor of the Year in April. Did you know before that? It's a simple yes or no question.
I wasn't aware of all of the circumstances surrounding the incident.
But you knew of the incident.
I was aware of an incident.
The Supervisor of the Year was demoted. In his appeal, he wrote he had already been verbally counseled. The incident had already been handled by the chief shortly after it occurred. And I feel I'm being more intensely punished because of the chief's oversight. Officer Brad Hill was also on that scene that cold January night. In September, he was the closest unit to this. A prisoner was dying in the back seat of a Roswell police cruiser. Officer Hill did not respond at all, in part because he was afraid of being involved in another internal investigation. Other Roswell and Alpharetta officers saved the overdosing prisoner with Narcan. Officer Hill was only verbally counseled for not responding as the closest unit. The chief then promoted Hill and gave him a raise later that same month. Roswell eventually fired him days after we asked for records of the incident.
They have had so many, not just problems, but very messed up things that they've let slide and swept under the rug instead of facing it and dealing with it. And then it just looks so much worse when somebody catches you.
Sarah Webb knows firsthand.
Officer Brown, Roswell Police Department. You know how fast you were just going, ma'am? Step out of the vehicle. Turn around, put your hands behind your back.
She was arrested for speeding after officers used a coin flip app when deciding if she would go to jail.
A head, R tail. Okay.
Officers Courtney Brown and Christy Wilson were also verbally counseled until we broke the story and it went global. Then both officers were fired. The officers themselves, the ones who have been fired or demoted, have said all of this was handled internally with verbal counseling until the media got involved, until the public was going to find out.
That's not holding anybody accountable.
Do you think the mayor or the city administrator should fire the police chief?
Yes.
Why?
Because he, I feel like, is the one that's been trying to hide everything until you guys have come after him.
Joined now by Brendan Keefe. Brendan, I look at this like a lot of viewers do, and I just sort of shake my head, yet I can't turn away from it, waiting to see what's next.
Yeah, what is next? We're still investigating the Roswell Police Department. We have new incidents we're investigating right now. What we just showed you with that officer who didn't respond to a prisoner dying in the back of a patrol car, that's new. And we find out that that officer got a raise and a promotion after that incident from the police chief.
And it should be noted that all of the information, all of the tips that you have received over the months have come within the Roswell Police Department themselves.
That's right. Our sources, we have several within the Roswell Police Department, but even in their own internal affairs investigations, you can see that multiple officers were very displeased with the command staff not holding the bad apples accountable. They basically felt there was a culture problem, and it's the good officers in the department.
This is how we do it.